This video will be looking at how much faster is a 5090 compared to a 5080, but man, the gap seems wild between the 80 and 90 series here. So just to throw in a little bit of context, I want to bring up a video I made 2 years ago looking at the 3080 versus 3090 and the 4080 versus the 4090, because even at that time I was spotting, wow, the gap between the 80 and 90 series is growing. Well, it's grown again. Now, there's a couple of percentage charts here from my old video. Link to everything will be in the video description, showing, okay, here we're looking at Plague Tale Requiem 4K Ultra. The 3080 is at 100% performance, 3090 is at 114%, so it's 14% faster. Notice the 3090 was only 15% or less faster than a 3080. There wasn't a massive performance loss by choosing the less expensive product. However, if we set the 4080 as the 100% baseline, we can now look at the percentage scaling from the 4080 to the 4090. And here it is 34% faster. So the performance gap between the 80 and 90 class products grew a lot going from the 30 series to the 40 series. But now looking at this initial test, which isn't necessarily representative of every test, we're seeing the 5090 64% faster than the 5080 in this particular test. Now, if I do go ahead and look at more of a geo-mean of the averages of everything we'll see here, we're going to see 44% faster. But if we limit it to 4K native results to reduce the number of, or actually some DLSS quality in here, but the point is reducing the number of CPU limited or system limited situations, we're seeing the 5090 about 48% faster. So there's the short version of this video. But the other thing we can then look at besides the growing gap between the 80 and 90 class, because it used to be so close, we can also look at, so what does that translate to? What can the 5090 do that a 5080 can't? And so would it be worth spending the frankly ridiculous extra money to buy the 90 class? Even, like, honestly, guys, maybe let's pop into this for a second. As of the time of filming, a 5080, the supply is not great on these, and if I wanted to buy one new and in stock, I'd be spending almost $1,600 when the MSRP is supposed to be $1,000. Now, the 5090, though, is even worse. These are listing at $4,000. Now, sometimes these will pop in stock at more like the $2,500 to $3,000 price range, although those have been selling quickly when they pop into stock at those prices. And the 5080 will occasionally restock. Hey, look, it's already gone up to $1,609 on the lowest one. Anyway, the 5080s will also pop back into stock closer to their MSRPs, but it's not really the MSRP models that have been being restocked. So it's more like $1,300-ish when you can actually grab one up before the scalpers do, that kind of thing. Hopefully this all settles down soon, so if you're watching this in the video, hopefully things are going, in the future, hopefully things are going better for you. Now, let's go ahead and once again establish, so what does this performance difference allow the 5090 to do that the 5080 can't? So if you were considering spending a ridiculously high increase in price, what are you getting for your money? Well, the 5090 can produce a 60-ish FPS experience in path tracing at 4K when only relying on quality level upscaling. And here we're looking at it using the new transformer model tested out in 4K RT overdrive in Cyberpunk. The 5080, on the other hand, while playable at 39 FPS, is not the frames you would actually want to be playing at. Let's go ahead and jump into what if we did want to get around 60 FPS on the 5080 at these 4K RT overdrive settings. Well, the difference is you have to use performance mode upscaling, which with the new transformer model does look so much more usable than it used to, especially with the new ray reconstruction for this path tracing mode. But that's really the main difference, is that you have to be much more aggressive on the upscaling with the 5080 to get the 4K path tracing going, and the 5090, when using those same settings, which again are pretty usable now, is actually a little over 90 FPS average, 53% faster than the 5080 in this test. Now, what if you're playing at 1440p? Or actually, before we do 1440p, how about we look at frame generation? Now, both of these cards are capable of the new multi-frame generation. Here we're seeing it in its maximum ×4 mode, and you can see the 5080 can then fill out 183 frames presented to the display, while the 5090 can present 280 frames to the display. That does not mean the game is actually rendering at those frame rates, so if you see the latency counters up there, you can get an idea that well, actually, if we jump back to before we were using the ×4 frame gen mode, In DLSS performance mode, notice latency numbers are like 30-ish milliseconds, a little bit mid-30s on the left, and usually under 30, kind of in the mid-20 millisecond range, sometimes going a little over 30 on the 5090. If we jump into the ×4 frame gen mode, we can see that the 5080 is often in the mid-40s, even pushing into 50 milliseconds of latency, and the 5090 is kind of more in the mid-30s or so in latency. Now, I'm not saying that these latency numbers are unplayable, and everybody's experience with that is going to be different, especially whether you're using a mouse and keyboard versus a controller versus just how sensitive are you. So the point is, I think for a lot of people, this is going to feel perfectly fine. But just do keep in mind that it's not going to feel anything like 200 FPS. What this is great for is taking advantage of a high refresh rate display. So if you render the game, 60 FPS and above, but then you have a 240 hertz display, this is going to do a better job of taking advantage of that in motion fluidity. Now, let's drop to 1440p, and the 5090 is the only GPU in the world that can do path tracing at 1440p without any reliance on upscaling and still hit around 60 FPS. Here we're seeing the 5090 average 64 FPS, putting it 60% faster than the 5080, which is hitting 40. But realistically, again, even on a 5090 around 60 FPS was probably not the frames you're buying a 5090 for, even if they're perfectly playable. So if you kick on quality level upscaling with the new transformer model, this looks quite good at 1440p, and the 5090 jumps to 108 FPS. Keep in mind that with upscaling, which is what we're looking at here, as opposed to frame generation, the latency numbers improve as well, because the game is actually rendering faster by using upscaling. So latency numbers decrease. This feels very performant. 108 FPS, and that is a real 108 FPS. The only bit that's fake is the resolution, but the quality level transformer model looks quite good. So I think this is a very good experience, and the 5080 is able to deliver 73 FPS here. Now, that also means that if frame rates are high enough that I think for most people's standards, frame generation is going to be very usable here. So if you have a high refresh rate display, kicking on ×4 multi-frame generation puts the 5080 up to 227 frames presented to the display. Remember, only 1/4 of those actually being rendered. And notice that the latency numbers now are worse than they were when we were just using DLSS quality without frame generation. That being said, I think these latency numbers for many people will still be completely acceptable, but again, that's a very subjective thing. The 5090 is at 337 frames presented to the display, which is a lot. So basically, what's the difference between the two GPUs here? Well, the difference is if you have like a 360 hertz 1440p display, the 5090 is doing a better job of maxing out the motion fluidity on offer, whereas the 5080 is better suited to maybe a 240 hertz 1440p display. However, the 5090 is also rendering more actual frames here, decreasing the latency. So the 5090 will also feel more responsive than the 5080 does, but I think a lot of people would find the 5080 very responsive here and find it acceptable. Anyway, let's move on to another path tracing test with Indiana Jones and the Gray Circle. Now here, this game's texture cache settings, when they're maxed out at Supreme, are very VRAM heavy, and then so is path tracing. So when you combine the two, we go beyond 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and the 5080 drops to 3 FPS. If you reduce the texture cache to very ultra, which is one notch down, frame rates jump to 55, but the 5090 is able to hit 82 without turning anything down. It's a 49% advantage. And also, though, I should mention that the texture cache setting, I couldn't notice any visible difference in the footage. So I really think you were getting a pretty equivalent situation there as far as I could see. Anyway, if we drop to 4K Supreme settings, which are the highest non-path tracing settings, then we see both GPUs are capable of a native 4K resolution at a high frame rate, the 5080 hitting 92 and the 5090 hitting 126, putting it 37% faster than the 5080. So here, both GPUs are doing a great job, not needing any DLSS or anything. Now, if we go to 1440p, but we also turn on the full ray tracing mode, so your path tracing kind of experience here, once again, we see that the 5090 is the only graphics card that can do 1440p path tracing modes at around 60 FPS. The 5080 is averaging around 42. Notice these numbers are similar to what we saw in the Cyberpunk test. Anyway, the 5090 is 52% faster here. But if you enable DLSS quality, the 5080 now jumps to about the same frame rate we were getting at native resolution with the 5090, and the 5090 jumps to over 90 FPS, putting it 49% faster than the 5080. So the 5080 can do 1440p path tracing with DLSS quality. The 5090 can do it better. Or could do it at native. And again, you could kick on frame generation from here, but I've already kind of explained my thoughts on frame generation in the Cyberpunk testing, so for the rest of the video, just remember, if you're hitting reasonable frame rates, you could turn on frame generation in supported games and fill out the motion fluidity on a high refresh rate display. Anyway, at 1440p supreme settings, so this is turning the path tracing mode off, here we see the 5080 able to deliver 138 FPS and the 5090 175, putting the 5090 only 27% faster. I mean, it's still noticeable, but really both GPUs would feel very good on a 1440p display here at these settings. In Silent Hill 2, which is an Unreal Engine 5 game that actually allows hardware-based Lumen, hardware-accelerated RT, a lot of UE5 games only offer the software version, 4K Epic RT on maxed out native res, the 5090 can deliver over 60 FPS here. Whereas the 5080 is in the mid-40s, 5090 is taking a 43% lead. That being said, you can just kick on DLSS quality, and to be clear, for the rest of this video, I use the DLSS modes that were natively supported in the game without requiring a third-party app or a NVIDIA driver app override feature. So, in other words, it'll be the older CNN model of DLSS in the rest of the DLSS test throughout this video. Anyway, the 5080 hitting 67 FPS with DLSS quality, the 5090 hitting 91. So 36% faster on the 5090, but again, the 5080 is still very playable here, and you could, of course, use more aggressive DLSS settings if you wanted to. Now, Silent Hill 2, 1440p epic settings with hardware ray tracing turned on, so maxed out 1440p. The 5080 is doing a nice job. 77 FPS is a slow-paced single-player game. You're probably perfectly fine here. But the 5090 is offering a much smoother experience at 100 FPS, putting it 30% faster than the 5080. If we just jump into another Unreal Engine 5 graphical showcase, this being Hellblade 2: Senua's Saga, the high settings are the maximum settings available in the game. There's no epic or ultra or anything. We see the 5080 doing 51 FPS. It's playable in this slow pace of a game. The 5090 is at 76, putting it 49% faster. But also I'll mention that the 50 series GPUs in this game seem to have a weird AA issue or something where things are way more pixelated than they should be if you look at like those trees in the background and things like that. And I only saw this on my 50 series GPUs. Using the same driver on my 30 and 40 series GPUs, I didn't see that problem. So anyway, just throwing that out here, that seems to be a little bit of an issue with the 50 series cards in this game. However, if you use DLSS, I don't see that issue, and honestly, if you're playing at 4K, you probably would at least kick on DLSS quality on both GPUs. And then the 5080 is now delivering 82 FPS, and the 5090 is delivering 111, putting it 35% faster here. If we jump to 1440p max settings, the 5080 is good for 84 FPS, and the 5090 is good for 115. So, both delivering a very good experience maxed out at 1440p in this big Unreal Engine 5 showcase. God of War Ragnarok at 4K Ultra settings have the 5080 delivering 85 FPS at native 4K max settings, no upscaling or frame generation required. That being said, the 5090 is still 51% faster, delivering 128 frames per second. So definitely a big lead there, and it is a smoother experience, but again, the 5080 is delivering a very good experience as well. DLSS quality boosts the 5080 up to 118 FPS and the 5090 to 170, putting the 5090 44% faster than the 5080 here. But again, they're both delivering a very good experience here. So all of this should be in the context of, is it worth spending thousands of dollars more on the 5090 to get the difference that you're seeing here, right? That's why I keep kind of mentioning the 5080 is delivering a very good experience too. Here we're looking at 1440p Ultra. The 5080 at 117 FPS, the 5090 at 183. It's a 56% advantage for the 5090, but both are delivering a good experience. In Final Fantasy XVI at 4K Ultra, the 5090 can hit 78 FPS here with no upscaling or anything required. The 5080 is at 53, so this is a case where, yeah, 5080 I'd probably want to turn settings down, the 5090 I might not. That being said, just enabling DLSS quality, which realistically I might probably do on the 5090 anyway to get over 100 FPS, the 5090 is now at 108 FPS. The 5080 is now at a perfectly acceptable 81. The 5090 is 33% faster. So definitely delivering a better experience, but they're both delivering a good experience. At 1440p max settings, both do a good job, the 5080 at 91 FPS and the 5090 at 117. That puts the 5090 29% faster than the 5080 in this test. If we jump into Horizon Forbidden West, 4K very high is the maximum settings the game offers, and the 5090 is delivering 121 FPS, putting it 61% faster than the 5080. But the 5080 is still delivering 75 FPS, which is still very good for a native maxed out 4K resolution in a single-player title. That being said, you could kick on DLSS quality, which I'd probably do, and the 5080 is now at 112 FPS, the 5090 is at 155, giving it a 38% advantage over the 5080 at these settings, and they're both delivering a very good experience. At 1440p max settings, we see the 5090 35% faster than the 5080, delivering 175 FPS compared to the 130 FPS offered by the 5080, but both are delivering an excellent experience. And in Ghost of Tsushima, 4K maximum settings, which are called very high in this game, the 5080 is delivering 76 FPS, maxed out 4K native resolution, but the 5090 is delivering 119 FPS, which is 57% faster. That being said, you can kick on DLSS quality on both. It still looks very good on a 4K output, and the 5080 is at 119 FPS now. So if you're on a 4K 120 display, 5080's got it covered. The 5090 at 170 FPS is still better by 43%, but again, very good experience on the 5080 here. Maxed out 1440p settings, we see the 5080 at 130 FPS, and the 5090 at 179. So the 5090 is 38% faster, but again, the 5080 is still delivering a very good experience here. In Call of Duty Black Ops 6, I'll note that I'm testing at basic settings rather than extreme. The idea here is that in competitive multiplayer titles, most users will turn down graphic settings for two reasons. One is to increase frame rate, and the other is to actually have a competitive advantage in terms of not having a lot of debris, trees, foliage, things like that, making it harder to spot enemies. So for all of those reasons, I think this is a good way to test a competitive title. And the 5080 is hitting 145 FPS at native 4K. Of course, you could upscale, and the 5090 is hitting 204 FPS, putting it 41% faster. But again, both doing a good job, and this is without even kicking on any upscaling. At 1440p basic settings, the 5080 hits 237 FPS, and the 5090 is oftentimes held back by the rest of the system, averaging 301 FPS, but you can see the GPU usage on the 5090 is often well below 100%, sometimes even down into the 80s, low 90s, indicating that it could go faster if there was a faster CPU than the 9800X3D. Now, that is the test that I have. So let's pop out, and again, I already kind of showed the graphs a little bit at the beginning, but the geomean of all of these results, and this bar chart is not frame rate, this is the percentage advantage per test, has the 5090 average 44% faster than the 5080. Sort by best result to worst result, it looks like this, which indicates that the 1440p results or the more aggressive upscaling results are often at the bottom of the chart, indicating that it's possible that some system limitations are influencing how fast the 5090 could go. If we instead go to 4K only results, we can see that it averages 48% faster. I just realized there's a typo here. That says 3080 12 gigabyte. This is the 5080 results there. I just apparently forgot to change that. Well, here, put my fat head in front of it. Anyway, the point is, so we're close to 50% faster. Like I said at the beginning of the video, that's growing the gap between the 80 and the 90 class generationally. Again, we're going from 15%-ish to 30%-ish to now 50%-ish gap between the 80 class and the 90 class. And I just can't help but feel like that's not great from the consumer perspective, as far as you used to be able to get almost the maximum performance the generation had to offer for a significant discount. And that's just not the case anymore. If you want a sanity check on my numbers here, if we go to like Tech Power-Up's relative performance chart, they show 3080 compared to the 3090 as 14% advantage for the 3090. So we're right on that. And if we go to the 4080 compared to the 4090, they are also producing they're a little short of a 30% advantage there on that one, but again, still growing the gap compared to the 30 class, and then if we hit the 5080 as the baseline, and look at that compared to the 5090, looks like they have a 52% result here. So again, independent testing, I always recommend checking out other reviews, but like this seems to be the result here. Anyway, so what does that mean? Well, in current market pricing, it means that you are certainly getting a much better GPU if you buy the 5090, but if you're spending $4,000 for that, I don't think that makes any kind of a value sense. But I know some people have a lot of money and this is their main hobby. And I'm not going to tell anyone not to just, buy the best thing for your hobby if you can afford it. Just understand that the value proposition on offer here isn't great. The 5080 at current pricing is also kind of awful. And I would recommend waiting in general if you're very value conscious. Anyway, but if we are just looking at these, the way they stack up against each other, I will say that the 5080 can deliver a good experience in pretty much every scenario. The only one that pushes it kind of to the borderline is 4K path tracing, where in that one situation, the 5080 can be a bit borderline even at performance mode, depending on your personal threshold for what's a good baseline from which to use frame generation. Everything else, the 5080 is often delivering either a great experience at native 4K, or if it's falling a bit short at native 4K, just kicking on DLSS quality, kind of solves the problem and you've got a good experience. At 1440p, the 5080 can do everything just fine. So there's that. The only other thing I'll mention is that there are competing products, both from NVIDIA and from AMD, even compared to the 5080. So for example, the 5070 Ti, if you can grab one for significantly less than a 5080, in the current market, it does offer much better value than the 5080 does, even if it's well above its original MSRP. And again, the more value-conscious buyers should probably just wait for the market to settle down. Also, AMD coming in with their 9070 XT, it isn't as fast as a 5080, but it's also significantly less money. It's a little slower than the 5070 Ti, more noticeably slower if talking about like path tracing results and just RT in general. But I'm just saying that you start to get into much better value if you go down the pricing segment. The closer you get to the top, the worse things look right now. And the 5090 is especially bad value at current pricing. So that's my overall thoughts on the video. Definitely consider alternatives. The 5090 is a lot faster than a 5080. Whether that's worth it to you or not is up to you. I hope all of you have an excellent day.